Okay, so we're now at a position where the book really is looking like one that's getting ready for the future as opposed to something that's, you know, managed to survive an immediately brutal past. Obviously, we did a lot of work yesterday. We glued this headband and tailband, put a lot of glue into the structure here, and that's worked very well. You'll also recall that we fixed the bottoms of the boards where we'd used a saw to separate them from the original binding. And that actually turned out very, very well. There is a tiny seam here, but it's really very, very hard to see. So I'm actually really pleased about the way that turned out. And internally, the fabric's now set. So these boards really do feel already, quite securely attached. There's no real play in them. They're not wanting to sort of move around. They're just acting like they're properly attached. So we're now at the stage where we can think about completing the outer section here. So to do that, we need a large piece of leather, and I have the other half of the binding here. Now this currently has these nice end papers attached, so I really want to keep those. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put the scissors through these end papers. It's just slightly off shot here, but that's all right. There we go. I'm just going to allow those to separate off. Okay, so now we're just left with this board. What I'm going to do with this is soak the leather off the board. Now, as a general rule, water and leather books just don't mix. It's only occasionally that I use water in any scenario, and the reason being that it generally completely and immediately destabilizes whatever it touches. But in this situation, we actually want to destabilize. So I have here a jug of water, and this board is now going to be allowed to soak and separate. So this is going to take quite a while. What I have found is that sometimes the end papers themselves can be, the paste down can be a little bit resistant. So what can help is just to gently score the paste down, and what that does is it just allows the water to sort of penetrate beneath and start to spread out and sort of soak into the fibers of the board underneath. So that's fine. So we'll leave that there to soak, and that's going to take an hour or two, so that can just do its thing. And in the meantime, we've got work to do on the book itself. So before we actually put any kind of leather on here, we need to think about two things. The first thing is, I've done a whole separate video on in the sort of general book restoration section about the history of how book spines have been built and how they've been adhered to the text blocks. I'm very much in favor of building a book spine where the outer leather is able to pull away as you open the board, so that gives flexibility and longevity, in simple terms, to the leather. And to do that, the way in which I do it, which is an adaptation of how bookbinders a few hundred years ago used to do it using a medieval manuscript, is to use a piece of card to basically act as a surface for the leather to be stuck onto that keeps it separate. So as you can see, I've taken basically a section of kitchen roll tube. It doesn't have any sort of harsh chemicals or dyes. It's as close as you can get to the sort of cardboard that I guess would have been used hundreds of years ago. And what I've done is, first off, I've been stamping out these holes here. Now that's just to try and even the surface, because here we've got these sort of bundles of twine, one on top of the other, and that just creates a little hill, and I want to make that a little bit less obtrusive when it's underneath the leather. So I've just been using this punch, and I sort of marked where the holes need to be, and in simple terms it's just a matter of going there's nothing desperately scientific about doing this. It's just a matter of making a hole that's big enough so the majority of the hump is presenting through, but not too big. And as you can see, I've also cut these slits into it. So the basic idea is, if I turn the book over, I'll put the other one here, we will have a card section that looks like this. Now, I must emphasize, we will be gluing the card, one card to the other card, but what we will not be doing is gluing anything to this fabric. This spine is basically done from a text block standpoint, and what I want to do is to make sure that the external spine that we fashion with leather is separate physically from the internal spine so that it can flex when the covers are open. So gluing anything directly onto here obviously completely undoes that. So so these they'll be glued at the edge, they'll be glued to each other, but they won't be glued down to this surface, which sort of brings to mind the other reason why we need these. If I was to bring wet leather and glue this onto here, what's going to happen? Well, the moisture in the wet leather is going to move into this fabric. It's going to soften the glue that's in this fabric, because this is all held down with water-soluble glue. And of course the leather will then stick to the fabric and basically do exactly what we don't want it to do. So that's why we need these in place. So the next thing I'm going to do is to glue these in situ, and we need to then hold them in such a way that they allow the right shape for the leather to be formed when we put that on top. Okay, so what I'm doing is putting sufficient glue on here. This is a good opportunity to get the these sort of tassels of twine as bedded down and as flat as we can reasonably get it. Note the glue, I'm not gluing all the way to the edges because these bottom and top ones aren't actually going to be covered by the card. There we go. Then what I'm going to do is, as you can probably see I've done with the other one underneath, is I'm going to use a piece of kitchen towel just to act as an absorbent surface. Help stop the glue spreading out onto the leather surface itself, which could happen a little bit. It's not a disaster, but even so, it's not something we necessarily want. Now what I'm going to do is pick the book up and put it into a sort of working vise that I've got here. And what that'll do is enable me to exert a pressure on the sides to have the glue set whilst I work on the central spine itself. It's just a bit finicky. Come on. A little bit more. Good. So now that gives us a chance to work on this central area here while everything else is held firm. So what I'm going to do, as I mentioned earlier, is I'm going to glue the card to each other, but I'm not going to glue anything to the underlying fabric. So what I have here are needles, and the reason for the needles is I want a way to hold the card in place, because it's obvious its natural tension is going to want it to spring back, because ultimately I want the leather to mold around these ribs here externally. So in order to make sure that these pieces of card have the right tension in them, I need to make sure that they glue in the right place, like so. So what I'll just do here is, this one's a little bit, these are a little bit long. There we go. I'll go find myself a needle to do this last one. And then we'll allow this to set, and basically then we'll be in a position to think about putting the final piece of leather on. Okay, so I've taken the leather board here out of its bath, and it's now in a position to relinquish its grip just about on the underlying board here. I'm just going to use my hand very gently just to school my way down, and what that does is it reveals the leather underneath. I might as well just pull that off. There we go. Now the leather that's folded under is almost always the most vulnerable, because it's the thinnest. So obviously you'd want that kind of hidden if you were a bookbinder. So you can see it sort of tears away a little bit here. I'm trying to avoid that happening, even though we're not going to be using these sections. I'm actually going to use going to tease. Let's start at this end, maybe. There we go. Worth taking your time over. Just levering it up nice and gently until she gives. There we are. Okay, same here. This has sort of glued itself back down, even though we just released it. There we go. So now we're in a position to gently pull the leather back from the board. Now the more evenly and widespread you apply the force, the lower the risk of any kind of nasty tear happening. And if you hit sudden resistance, stop and try it from the other side. There we go. Come to this side a bit. Now the glue is proving quite truculent here, and it's actually dry. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to stop pour a little bit more water on, let it soak for a little bit longer, and then complete the removal. Okay, so this has continued to soak here. I'm using a really blunt knife, really blunt, just to act as a broad edge to pull this away. It's all down to the amount of glue that the original bookbinder used in one massive dollop, and it looks as though he really went for it with this central area here. And there we go. You see that? That looks like a hard dollop of glue right there. There's another great big dollop right there. So the tack at this point is simply to remove as much board as we can to expose the glued area where it's kind of resistant to the water. There we go. And then continue to let nature do its work. Okay, so 98% of the border's gone. What you can do at this last stage is just use a sort of draw your finger across to create sort of rolls of fibre that just come off. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect because this is all going to be facing inwards, so it won't be visible. But you want to try and remove as much of this old gunk as you can do before using the leather in the new binding. So I'm going to continue this, and then we'll move to the next step. Okay, so I removed these sections from that leather. We'll keep that spare for future use. This is the leather itself. That's the outside facing. This is the inside facing. So that's a lovely, nice piece of leather there. And this is the book. So I'm just going to good. So now we've attached the cardboard.